Hi everyone, welcome back to Learning Aid. In today's video, I'll be talking about skull's anterior view, also known as the frontal view. Anteriorly, the skull looks oval in shape because of the frontal bone placed superiorly and the mandible that lies inferiorly. The middle third of the facial skeleton is majorly occupied by maxilla. Let's dive deep and learn about the landmarks on the anterior surface of the skull. We're going to learn about different skull bones from top to bottom, and then in the end look at all the foramina on the anterior aspect of the skull. The first one that I'll be talking about is the frontal bone. It's at the very top or superiorly placed, and it makes up the forehead. The eminent part on the frontal bone is known as the frontal eminence. Next is glabella. Glabella is basically the part that is between the two eyebrows. Okay, so right in the middle of the two eyebrows, that bone is known as the glabella. Up next is the superciliary arch. This is basically your brow bone, and it's also known as the supraorbital ridge. Super in anatomy means above. Ciliary meaning hair-like, that is, you can remember that as your brows. And arch is a curved elevated surface. So it's the most logical name to remember, you guys, okay? So superciliary arch is your brow bone. Next is the nasal bone that forms the bridge of the upper one-third of the nose. This bone is made of two oblong bones placed side by side. And between the two bones is the internasal suture that joins them together. Inter meaning in between the two. Next is the cavity on either side of the nasal bone, which is the orbital cavity. It contains the eyeballs and its associated muscles, vessels, and nerves. We'll be talking about orbital cavity in detail in a separate video because it's out of the scope of this video. Okay. Now, for the orbital cavity, the superior margin of the cavity is called as supraorbital margin, and the inferior margin is known as the infraorbital margin. All very easy to remember if you think about it logically. Superior, therefore supraorbital. Inferior, therefore infraorbital margin. Okay. Next is the zygomatic bone. So zygoma, it means yolk. And it's the thing that anchors the two cows together. So here is the picture to explain it better. And this is exactly how the shape of the zygomatic bone is, as well as its function. Okay, so zygomatic bone, it essentially bridges the frontal, temporal, maxillary, and sphenoid bones together. And zygomatic bone, it's also known as the malar bone, meaning cheeks. So this bone, it forms the cheeks and the lateral wall of your orbital cavity. Now, here is the body of the zygomatic bone. And the zygomatic bone has two processes. The process that extends towards the frontal bone is the frontal process of zygomatic bone. And the process of the frontal bone that extends towards the zygomatic bone is the zygomatic process of the frontal bone. The suture between the two is the zygomatico-frontal suture. Two bones involved, zygomatic and frontal. Therefore, the suture is named as zygomatico-frontal suture. Okay. The process that extends towards the temporal bone, here I'm going to show you the lateral view so it's easy to understand. So this process is known as the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. Alright. So for the processes, just remember to which bone the process is going to and of which bone the process belongs to. So if the process is going to the frontal bone and the process belongs to the zygomatic bone, the name would be frontal process of zygomatic bone. Alright, I hope that's helpful to understand. Okay, next is maxilla. It's the bone that forms your upper jaw. Maxilla is basically made up of two bones that are fused in the middle by the intermaxillary suture. Logical name, guys. Inter meaning in between. It's fusing two maxillary bones, so intermaxillary suture. Okay, the projection that is formed in the middle by fusion of these two bones is known as the anterior nasal spine. The spine is placed at the level of the nostrils at the uppermost part of the philtrum, and hence the name is nasal spine, even though it is formed by the fusion of maxillary bone. Alright, so anterior, we're seeing the anterior view of the skull, so it's anterior, and nasal spine because it's at the level of the nostril or the uppermost part of the philtrum. So it's really, it really looks like it's part of your nose, okay, and it's spiny, so anterior nasal spine. Now maxilla in total has 3 processes. The first one extends towards the zygomatic bone and is known as the zygomatic process of the maxilla. The suture between the two is the zygomatico-maxillary suture. The second process extends towards the frontal bone and is known as the frontal process of maxilla, and the suture between the two is the frontomaxillary suture. The third one is the alveolar process of the maxilla, which has tooth sockets, and this process holds all the teeth, the upper teeth, in place. Okay. Now the final bone that we're going to see in this video is mandible, and this is basically your lower jaw. Okay, just like maxilla, this also has alveolar process and it holds all your lower teeth in place. Now the part of the mandible that forms your chin is known as the mental bone, and the anterior prominence on the mental bone is known as mental protuberance. There's also a prominence on the inferior border of the mandible, and that is known as the mental tubercle. Okay. Now we've seen all the bones that are present on the frontal aspect of the skull. Next, we're going to look into the foramens. There are 4 different types of foramens, and they are all in pairs. Okay, so 1 foramen on each side of your face. These 4 foramens are supraorbital, infraorbital, zygomaticofacial, and mental. And these are named based on the bony surfaces where they are situated. So the supraorbital foramen is on the supraorbital ridge. Infraorbital is below the infraorbital ridge. Zygomaticofacial is on the zygomatic bone, and the mental foramen is on the mandible near the mental surface. Okay, I hope this is really easy to remember. So once you remember the name of the bones, it'll be easy to think of what foramen's name would be because it's just on that bone. Okay, so yeah, this is all I have for you guys for this video, and I hope this was really helpful. Thank you so much for watching this, and I'll see you guys in my next video where we'll be talking about the bones that form the orbital cavity. Cheers.